Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today, the 27th of October 2024, we are interviewing a very important person who was very familiar with the Arta peace process. That's Professor Babafemi Badejo, who is now in Nigeria. Professor Femi, welcome to our program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Prof.
The topic of our interview is the Arta peace process and the rebuilding of the Somali state. And you were there when, in 2000, the conference was held in Djibouti as the deputy SRSG. And so, could we please start with a brief summary of your life history or biodata?
Well, by way of background, my name, as you said, is Babafemi Adeshino Badejo. I'm a Nigerian. Started working in Nigeria as an academic. I was teaching at the University of Lagos, and I was a senior lecturer for quite a while, about to go on to a higher level when the opportunity to have a practical experience in Somalia with respect to the peace process in Somalia under the auspices of the United Nations arose. And I thought I'll be away for just about 6 months. But I ended up staying for 13 years on Somalia before I left that docket. For a long time, the UN refused to allow me to go to any other place. They kept saying you are the institutional memory, and there was no point, just remain there. But I was stagnating, and eventually I left for Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, and Darfur, from where I retired, and currently now professor of political science and international relations at Chrisland University, Abeokuta, Nigeria.
Good, thank you, Professor. The Arta peace process was launched in September 1999. Can you give us the background of that initiative and what you know about it before we come to the role of the UN in that peace conference?
Well, it's the Arta peace process was a very long in coming. What I mean by very long in coming was that as Somalia broke apart and there wasn't central government, it took a lot of effort. We had UNISOM 1, UNISOM 2, with a mandate to assist the Somalis to realize peace, and several resolutions were put in place. But unfortunately, we had several meetings in Addis Ababa, Sodere, Jeddah, Sano, a whole range of places, Nairobi, in which there were semblances of agreements amongst the set of people that Somalis were calling warlords, but which we diplomatically referred to as faction leaders. Started with a number of factions that met in Addis Ababa when Ali Mahdi Mohammed and Mohammed Farah couldn't agree, and with the efforts to solve the problem in that meeting, there came proliferation of faction leaders different people started breaking into different stages and saying, I'm also a faction, because it became very profitable to have a holiday on the United Nations and the international community by going into five-star hotels around the world to negotiate peace. So if you couldn't make it this time, you get your sub clan to say that you are unique. And so we have a new faction, and the faction started proliferating. I don't know what the number ended up being before the Carta peace process. Of course, it should be borne in mind that the northern portion of Somalia, that used to be referred to as British Somaliland, they had reconciliation among themselves at Boroma Conference and formed what they called a government of Somaliland that was separate from the rest of Somalia. However, the international community did not feel that it was appropriate for Somaliland to break away from Somalia when Somalia was in coma. And so it became essential to make the point all the time that the world is happy that there is relative peaceful atmosphere in Somaliland, but that the world was not ready to make the next move and accept Somaliland as a separate country from Somalia. In spite of the history behind all that, which I don't want to get into, we'll lose time in terms of British Somaliland getting independence and later in a few days joining Italian Somalia to form the Republic of Somalia, with the aspiration that the current state of Djibouti, which was being referred to as French Somalia, or if you like, the land of the Afars and the Isas, the Ogaden in Ethiopia, and the portion of Somalia, the portion of Kenya that is Somali, will all come together to be a greater Somalia, but all that aspiration got frustrated. So the world wasn't ready to start all that all over again and say that they were going to recognize Somaliland is what I was trying to get at. So we, as both as UNOSOM 2, where I served, and when UNOSOM 2 was forced out of the country by the fact that the leaders in Mogadishu indicated that they no longer wanted UNOSOM 2, and Boutros Ghali, the Secretary General, came to the conclusion that the mission had to end. And as the Americans got involved in the Black Hawk Down under Clinton, and they also decided that it was an impossible mission creep, and they weren't going to continue anymore. And so we adjourned to we moved to Nairobi as UN political office for Somalia. Of course, that UN political office was very, very spartan in terms of size. It was a representative of Secretary General and myself. I wasn't designated deputy formally at that time, at the beginning. It was down the line that I became designated as deputy special representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Somalia. So I need to clarify that from your introduction. So we started different efforts to try to get peace going for Somalia. And we had very interesting meetings with Mohammed Ibrahim Igal, the quote, president of Somaliland at the time. And we thought that a seasoned elder statesman that had taken over Somaliland and was doing beautifully well politically could go a long way in assisting in solving the problem of Somalia. He had taken over from Tool, who was the president that came out of the Buruma conference. And it did appear that Mohammed Ibrahim Igal was ready to listen to that possibility. And we started talking of an Igal initiative to reconcile and solve the problem of Somalia. Meetings were held severally between myself and David Stephen, who was my boss. David Stephen was the representative of Secretary General, and myself, himself, and Hussein Hassan Abdi, a Somali that was working for us, with us as interpreter and translator. We had several meetings to Mohammed Ibrahim Igal, trying to map out the possibilities of the Igal initiative to help solve the problem of Somalia. However, it did appear like Igal was worried as his people started suspecting that he may jump ship and want to be the president of overall Somalia. So Igal had some reticence in putting all his eggs into the basket and saying that he kept saying that Somaliland is separate, but we should go, if we want him to assist, he can solve the problem and whatever.
So basically,
while we were doing,
so yes. Basically he was saying, we will not join the meeting, but we can be available for mediation within the Somali southern region.
Yes. Yes, that is the sense of what Mohammed Ibrahim Igal was saying, even though we are not sure that deep down, if there was a success story, that he will not accept to leave Somaliland for Somalia. So, but all that is speculative because he never came out clearly.
But from your how many meetings did you have with him before Arta meeting started?
Well, we regularly visited Somaliland because it was safer, it was easier, and other parts of Somalia like Bosaso, Garowe, and other places that were relatively Baidoa. So the number of times we had met, David Stephen and I met Igal, probably for this particular purpose, might have been 2-3 times, but there was also a fact-finding mission that was fielded by IGAD and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development that canvassed and went through many parts of Somalia, listened to the leaders to try to come up with what will be the way forward. We also met Igal under that auspices. So it became like Igal and ourselves were meeting, and like almost when we are doing that, the European Commission, their delegation meant for Somalia, but resident in Nairobi, many a time involving the counselor in charge of Somalia, a guy named Joao Duarte. as well as Dr. Walid Musa, were on this kind of efforts with IGAL. But as all that was happening, it turned out that an election took place in Djibouti for the successor to the long-time president Hassan Guled Aptidon, and his chef de cabinet, and referred to also as his nephew, won that election. So there was the thinking on our part, and being prompted by some Somalis, especially Nurta, who was a former Ali Mahdi wife, that why can't we get the Secretary General to appoint Guled Aptidon to carry out the process of solving the Somali problem? So we had gone to meet.
That's after he left the office. Is that when he as a
yes, after he left office? Yes, because he had made efforts when he was in office. There was Djibouti 1, Djibouti 2, or whatever. He had made effort that didn't yield. Now, Nurta and people like her were feeling that since he's now an old man in retirement, he could get one of the people who had worked with him to assist. And I remember we went to meet the what you call it. Now, I mean, the time I was talking about, he was still in office, but after he had left office, we didn't go to meet him. We went to now meet with President Gele, who was sworn in May of 1999 or so. And we thought about whether he could play a role. I think I'm having a memory gap in this instance. He actually made a speech at his swearing in. He made a speech at his swearing in. I don't know if it was May 7, May 9, or whatever, at which he said passionately that he would like to see Somalia back on its feet, and that he was going to devote his presidency towards working for Somali reconciliation. We picked that up as a UN office and sought audience with him. And again, the European side of the house accompanied us to meet with Gele, but not as a group. We normally operated as UN, they operated as the EC, EU, at which we quoted what he had said and indicated our willingness to support his effort in that respect. And he expressed gratitude for our coming, and that he is really determined to see what he can do to bring the Somalis back in a process of getting them together. You can say that for us, that probably marked the beginning of what later became the Carta peace process. So there were quite a number of discussions in and out by ourselves, and some of his own efforts that I don't know the details of. And then he went to the General Assembly, the 54th General Assembly in 1999, September, and there he devoted over half of his allotted time to talk about the need for the world to wake up and not continue to leave Somalia the way it is. Made a very strong case, and that gave us additional encouragement that we are getting somewhere, because there is a young man who now has the power to see how Somalia can be put back on its feet. Now, there has been debate as to whether this was altruistic on his part, or there were more in terms of his personal interest, national interest, or whatever. Some will say, for instance, that Djibouti was a small country with, by that time, I don't think the total population was 500,000, with Somalis of the Isa clan background, as well as the Afars. But there was the huge Ethiopia that would like to have access to the sea, and Djibouti worried about its continuing to have its sovereignty over its port city, just as there was problem between Eritrea and Djibouti, because Djibouti had provided an alternative to the Eritrean port that Ethiopia, that used to be part of Ethiopia, that Ethiopia relied upon. And there were all those fears. And some have argued that if you could get Somalia back on its feet, then Djibouti would be relatively safer with a Somali that would be supporting its efforts in the whole problem within IGAD and all the rest of it and what have you. There are quite a number of reasons that some suggested, business interests and whatever, that we may not get into. However, the fact of the matter is, as he has done that, when he went to make the speech, we found out that he didn't consult with any of the neighbors when he made his speech. But diplomatically, if some of the neighbors were telling us that they did not condemn the speech, because Seyum Mesfin, who was the foreign minister of Ethiopia, represented Ethiopia that year, not being a president, he gave his speech like about 2 weeks after Gele's speech. Those days, they used to have a long 1 month or so of speaking. The financial problems have reduced the length of time to a total of 10 days now. So it was possible to listen to what Ethiopia would say, but Ethiopia gave the diplomatic reaction that it welcomes the effort of President Gele to try to put Somalia back together. But what we heard off the cuff were different, was that President Gele did not consult, and that he went ahead. I don't know if that is true either, because some of the things that I have learned from my experience is diplomats, lying is not a problem in diplomacy. But in any case, we continue with the engagement, supported President Gele as best as possible, and President Gele decided that he was going to have consultations with the Somali diaspora. One thing that was clear in his speech, or his speeches generally, was that he demonized the warlords and said, we cannot continue the way the world has been doing with the warlords. We must find a way to bring Somalis on the basis of the territories that formed the country and not clans. We must bring them
that was his
to the
position.
table.
That was his position, not clan, yeah, but regional.
Yes, the initial position in the very beginning, that was his position. Of course, there is a lot of debate that went on this. The Europeans and the Americans, I remember Ambassador Shemahon, who was the US ambassador to Djibouti, a very nice, amiable lady, was kind of like, how can anybody still be talking about clans in the 21st century? My own boss insisted that it is territory we were going to. I took the opposite position with Hussein Hassan Abdi. So we were divided even amongst ourselves within our office. I'm telling it for the first time that, and so there were all these, the decision was to have at first phase of the process a technical symposium to which many Somalis in the diaspora, knowledgeable people in the diaspora like late Gandhi and others were brought to Djibouti to brainstorm on what would be the way forward. I don't remember clearly now, but I think they were being pushed by Djibouti to that same position of territory is it and not clans. The Ethiopians at that point in time, you will say, are supportive of territories because they had started what they call the building blocks approach. And the building blocks approach was simple. It only said that Somaliland is a building block. It has peace. Puntland had started its own process and was showing peace as another building block. So let the Rahanweyn form their own Rahanweyn land as another building block, and then let's see what happens with the Hawiye in Mogadishu, whether they would also form a Benedict administration and another block. That was at that time what Ethiopia was pushing, and so it did appear like it was going to be a territorial, without really defining what territory are we talking about. The regions that Siad Barre had formed, I think was 18, or will it be the territories that had coalesced as blocks? And all these were fundamental problems, but invariably, I don't know who and who changed the thinking of President Gele, represented in the meetings that we were having, because I was donated by the United Nations to assist the process, just as Dr. Walid Musa was donated by the EC to assist the process. And we were in Djibouti working with Ambassador Olhaye, as well as Ziad, Ambassador Ziad Douale, who is now currently the Djibouti permanent representative to the United Nations and ambassador to Washington. He had succeeded Olhaye, because those were the seats of Olhaye that Olhaye had for a long period of time and took charge of Africa as in the end, because Goulet Aptiton just left him there, So we had these several meetings, and until we now realize that perhaps there was a meeting that Igal had with President Gele, because we kept pushing him to reach out to Igal, and Igal came over and they had a one-to-one. And nobody really knows, probably till today, what transpired at that meeting.
Can I interrupt you? Igal went to Djibouti to talk to the President Gele. Is that
yes? Yes, and came out and said that he supports the Gele initiative. And the people of Somaliland immediately felt that Igal is about to jump ship. And so there were demonstrations in Somaliland led by the House of Assembly, whatever, I've forgotten its Somali name at the time, and people into Somaliland is separate. So Igal reiterated the fact that Somaliland is separate, but he supports the Gele initiative. I don't know if the change towards trying to see how to broaden the base of the consultations started as at that time, because I think Igal felt that Gele cannot be planning to succeed if he continues to demonize the warlords without countervailing power, because all the thoughts that the world were going to supply all the troops that all of a sudden will keep these warlords in check was not about to happen. So President Gele had to find a way. And then he also was advised to include the traditional leaders. And the process of including the traditional leaders brought in the clan through the back door, in spite of all what he had said before. So we now had to deal with a situation in which he had that technical group that advised. They remained in Djibouti, because people tend to say Djibouti process started in May. No, Djibouti process had started as far back as about February, when the technical symposium started meeting. And then came the question of some knowledgeable elders, 8 of them in French, Conseil des Sages, Council of the Wise, to say, that also came in. And all these people now were insisting on the fact that it's not going to be possible to move forward. You can build with the clan and then de-emphasize the clan later, but that it must be a basis of assembling people reasonably. Invariably, it was agreed that there would be 180 representatives per clan. And so you will have 180 for the 4 main clans, and all the minorities who refuse to be called minorities in Djibouti will have 90 representatives, so that when all these come together, whatever decision they end up making in terms of realizing a charter, in terms of having an assembly, and assembly coming up with the president, would be broad enough to include everybody. But when all these were going on, there were several invitations to Somalis by competing presidents of other countries. Some of that included Libya. At one point, Djibouti, Egypt, Ethiopia, even President Moi in Nairobi, all trying to say, can we help? Can we help?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Is that while the Arta peace process was going on?
Before, as we were trying to go towards the peace process, everybody was scampering. Even though they all say we support the Gele initiative, they were also giving invitations or accepting reach out from other Somalis, because it turned out that what you call him, the Libya process was probably initiated by the Hawiye, and Muammar Gaddafi then sent for Abdullah Yusuf, who had just gone out of hospital over his liver, but Abdullah Yusuf ended up going to Libya, and there were discussions there. And on the basis of some of these, Osman Ato and Hussein Aidid saying that they will not be part of the Gele initiative. And of course, as I told you, Ethiopia continued to repeat the building blocks as the best way forward. Now, something I should also make very clear was that President Gele decided, without consulting with us or anybody, that he was going to put his eggs on the international community with the United Nations. But he wanted all the money allocatable, if I can use that expression, to Somalia with the EU to be put on the table for the peace process. Whatever money was with the UN to be added to it in order to realize the funds to carry out. But he was hell-bent on the fact that, and you could say rightly so, the experience had been, you bring all the Somali leaders together, you are about to reach an agreement, and then everything falls apart because one country or the other disrupts everything. And before the ink has dried on what they are negotiating there, you are hearing that they've gone to another capital in their peace nomadism. So President Gele ab initio was not ready to, and you know, everybody appointing special envoy on Somalia, either sitting in, mainly sitting in Nairobi, some in Addis Ababa, and all these people were active in wanting to be on the table to decide. In fact, some of them felt that all that Gele needed to do was to just be a moral authority, but that we should be the ones to carry out whatever needed to be done. But Gele wouldn't have any of that. Typical Somali. He refused. So invariably, they also decided no funding. And Gele decided that if the Djiboutians have to eat grass, they will fund it by themselves. And it was interesting, by the time Atta opened and you found people bringing goat, bringing chicken, bringing whatever they had to support the Atta peace process. The meeting was adjourned to Atta, principally also to reduce the impact of the international community, because you cannot drive them out of Djibouti city. So I cannot come to rent a place at the Sheraton and you say I cannot speak to Somalis. So a decision was made by the Djiboutians that they have to cut all these envoys out of the process and let the Somalis among themselves talk, and they took them into Atta. We, as United Nations, had a free pass, but nobody else was given such an access from the international community. That may be some of the problems for the process later. In any case, the meeting happened and followed the Somali way, and there was a lot of fanfare. Sodowo, the music that was made at the time, became the national anthem. Each meeting, there will be recitals and all the rest of it, trying to replicate a Somali way of doing it, which President Gele was. There was a particular day that it appeared that everything had ended and it had failed. And okay, so it was for everybody to go back to wherever they came from. And Gele came and he showed up. He mounted the stage and started speaking. And as he spoke, he started weeping and was really crying, shedding tears. And the Somalis became emotional. They all started crying. And they went to meet him on the dais and embraced him and said, we must solve the problem here. We are not going. Of course, Abdullah Yusuf, who first refused that nobody will come, allowed a delegation to come, led by the vice president and Hassan Abshi Farah. You remember Hassan Abshi Farah?
Yes. Yeah.
So they led that delegation. Then along the line, when Abdullah Yusuf felt that he was not getting enough access and control over what was going, he ordered that they should all return home. Hassan Abshi Farah led those that says, no, we are not going back. And he became the chairman of the conference in seeing that things worked well. Of course, a lot of effort was put into that. I do hope that I will write out some of these things eventually. The efforts, the detailed efforts that went into making the ARTA process work. We were just observers and having the reporting responsibility to the UN in New York and to any of the members of the international community that wanted to talk to us. We moved our office to Djibouti in the period at the Sheraton till when a decision was finally made that saw the election of the of Abdikasim Salat Hassan. That election process itself took place, and the international community was invited to witness it. So you had all the envoys of IGAD, of the this, of the that, of Italy, of everybody at the election process. And of course, there were allegations of bribing the people by the business community of Djibouti led by Abdurrahman Bore. So that one is a different long story on its own. The Bore-Gele relationship and the process of the peace process and eventually how all that also fell apart separately. And so Ethiopia, Ethiopia as represented at that meeting felt that a lot was wrong about that election, which they told us privately, but not internationally. So when Abdikasim Salat Hassan arose as the president, we went ahead to assist and agreed on a swearing-in day. At that swearing-in day, you had a number of people represented, but most important among those was Meles Zenawi, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. President Moi did not come, but he asked Mohamed Afe, who was his Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs and who had been on the spot for a while, to represent Kenya. And everything was fine. And Meles gave advice to Abdikasim, shook hands and whatever. But on that same day, Bill Clinton had invited a number of African presidents to meet him in Tanzania, I believe Arusha. And so Meles left from the meeting to go join the Bill Clinton meeting, at which the boss, our boss at the United Nations, was also at that same meeting of America consulting with African leaders. At that meeting, from what I later learned, Prime Minister Meles did not present a very positive image of the process that he had just left. In his briefing to President Moi and the rest of the leaders and the United Nations at the highest political level,